on this rap-ish. I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list. Hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own. Tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues. Guess if you ain't at the table, you on the menu. And I'm that spitter, baby. They don't want you to see, but everybody's south of Capitol Hill's rocking with me. Boys smoke the trays and ponder getting their life together. I'm comfortable with my role, so I'm like, whatever. Me? I ain't got a job, but I work hard. And you don't work hard, but you got a job. The irony is I'm judged while you feel the applause. I'm slept on, that's why I had to set this alarm. My dudes is armed, I'm armed with this arm charm. Body banging like she got that cream from Barry Bonds. Yeah.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
That Dre season is here, a real hitter with a mic, I'm everything that they fear. With that hood ain't the same, I was all on their ass, I'm level-headed. So yo, my dudes love when I spaz, and I'm so over Seattle's passive-aggressive attitude. They don't call you back, what they really saying is F you. While I'm from the same place, I move at a different pace. I prefer if you just said it to my face, damn, I did it.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Average dudes with they average spit, writing average rhymes, knocking average chicks. The closer I get, I can feel the people starting to shift. I'm loyal to a fault, and everybody can't come with. Rap's a rich man's game, I'm only playing with change. They bang models and singers, I'm knocking my old flame, I'm different. The crowd, I move with the chosen few. Black thoughts, I could be the front man for the roots. No diamonds and gold, I'm on my sticks and stones. If we can see your panty line, you should have on a thong. My team is strong, through this fire we forged a bond. And they already know what it is when I get on. To the hearse, party like it's December 31st. When I'm on my deathbed, I probably cracking my nurse. You ain't got the bars to compete. I'm a verbal athlete, deflating these boys so they say that I cheat. Damn, I did it.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Yeah. I should probably start by apologizing for the long wait, man. You know, I know I be tripping. But I'm not just a rapper, I'm an artist. And, you know, my creative process is a little bit different than most. Nonetheless, I want to welcome everybody out to the Dre's Experience. I got TCF in the building. My whole camp's here with me. I got the band in here laying this cool-ass vibe. And I'm Seattle's own. Let's get into it.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday to you out there. Welcome to the Morning Update Show. I am your co-host, Trey Holiday, and I'm excited today because we have a guest in studio with us, Mr. Brian Callanan from Seattle Channel. What's up, Brian?
It is so great to be here, Trey. Thank you so much, and thanks to Omari for giving me the shout to fill in here. He said, I need you to fill in. I'm like, you know what? Only if it's with Trey. You know, that's the only way I'm going to do it. So I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for making me a part of it. Converge is rocking it, and it's really cool to be here.
You know what? It's great to have you, and it's my first time being able to co-host with Brian. So we've been having a great discussion before we even started the show, and I'm excited to bring you guys what we have today. We have some headlines, and Brian has been very, very eager and giving us so many great things to discuss throughout the show. Before we get going, I have to give a special shout out to Boom Boona Coffee, which is opening up their second location today, right on 1223 East Cherry Street in the Central District. You know, every time we have an opening in the CD, Black-owned businesses, we love to celebrate them. So,
well, they got a great store down in Renton too.
Yeah,
so
do.
Having that second one is big for them, and a Restream family making it happen there. I think that's really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
You guys, unfortunately, we do have to start off with, you know, a little bit of rough news here. There was a shooting in Rainier Beach that took place over the weekend where a 16-year-old lost his life.
So officers responded to a shooting in the 9200 block of Waters Avenue South tonight, and they immediately got information that the suspect had gone to a door at the residence, knocked on that door. The 16-year-old victim went to the door and was shot multiple times. The suspect fled the scene. Officers arrived and attempted life-saving measures. The victim was declared deceased at the scene. Right now, homicide is investigating and is asking anybody that has information to call their violent crime tip line at 206-233-5000. But really, this is the second juvenile that's been shot in the last month. And, we're just trying to figure out ways to stop this violence. So we're asking the community to find, any which way that we can make sure that we put these shootings to rest and being able to also figure out who did the shootings.
This is a tough one. And you guys know that we, cover these because we know they're important to the community. But Brian, we've been talking about this rise in gun violence, particularly with the youth. And clearly, there's some numbers now to showcase a serious increase this year. This is just another unfortunate incident, man.
It is. And looking just this past month here, talking about the month of April, as Chief Diaz mentioned there, this is the second time that a young person has been involved as a victim. And as you recall, just a couple of weeks ago, we had that 2-year-old, that young girl that was shot at 23rd and Jackson outside the auto zone there. So I think the police are scratching their heads a little bit on this one. They can't figure out exactly why this is happening, but they need to figure out something in terms of making some changes here. And if you can, please do call the tip line there at 233-5000 for the SPD. It's an anonymous tip you can put in there. They're looking for information. They need to solve these crimes. And I think we as a community need to solve these too.
Yeah, I mean, literally, this is something that, we were talking about certain instances where it's like 100 shots. It's this many shots. I mean, it really is one of those things where we say, what is going on here within communities that really has, first of all, young people who may not have even had their first job yet.
Yeah.
And, you hear this story here where he was just answering the door.
That's right.
It's clear that that was probably a very purposeful attack.
Yeah.
And this is really what probably has the police going, what is going on here more than anything, because it isn't a random kind of act of violence. And they're not saying that.
Right.
And I know details will be coming out as this progresses, but it's something that I know we'll be keeping our fingers on the pulse of. Oftentimes here at Converge, unfortunately, we are connected to these stories. Oftentimes it's a stone's throw away. Our kids know somebody, or our family members, our colleagues, our friends, and that's what we keep experiencing here on Converge. And so this is one where I'm like, man, as these details come out, I'm just praying for the family. I always love to say that first and foremost, because they have lost a loved one and a young person at that. It's one of those things where, I'm sure as more details come out, we'll keep our fingers on it.
It's just police didn't have any information as to who might have done the shooting, who left the scene, or anything like that. And that's why that tip line is so important. So if you're connected in that area there, you might have known something that's happened. 233-5000 is what you got to call. And I just mentioned that again, Trey, because I feel the same way. So many of these stories, it's easy to put them aside. It's like, oh, that happened again, or something like that. It's a family. It's a real thing. And we're talking about some very young people here involved as victims. And it's just not healthy for anybody. It's difficult to talk about. It always is. And when you really think about the human element involved with it, in terms of who's passing away here, this is something that the police need our help in stopping.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree 100%.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I know that you actually came up. You got a couple of different clips that we're going to get into.
Been busy.
Yeah. I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce them. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I've been trying to follow a bunch of different things with the state legislature, Trey, which wrapped up its session just yesterday on Sunday. And so they did a whole bunch of things. It's one of those kind of deals where we're talking about police accountability. We're talking about some carbon tax stuff. I'm going to get into these in a little bit. We'll start with police accountability. But in looking at these different things, if they had done maybe like one or two of those things in a session, it would be like, oh, they really got something done. We're talking about like a good handful, like 4 or 5 really big things that some progress has been made on. And so I wanted to jump into the police accountability first. So big changes here in a lot of different things. And this is Representative Jesse Johnson's been working on this out of Federal Way. So we're talking about a ban on chokeholds, a partial ban on tear gas, and this new requirement for officers to report when their fellow officers are using excessive force. I think about these different things, and I just wanted to bring you in here. When you hear those different things happening at the state level, what's your reaction to that? Because I know a lot of people, including Shay Taylor's sister, just yesterday, they had a press conference about this, and they were like, finally, something's happening. What do you think about that?
I think it's so key. One of the things that I think a lot of people on the ground kind of talk about is, it takes the collective people voice to start moving these things through. And just shout out to Jesse Johnson,
Yeah,
man,
for real.
Federal Way. I
Yep.
lived out there. So I think that he really had his finger on the pulse here and said, you know what, we can no longer allow these things to continue.
Whole Black Caucus was doing that.
If there's a way that we can start introducing these new reforms into legislation at the state level, we can actually have some real transformative change. And so I agree, with the sentiments of Jay Taylor's sister. I agree wholeheartedly because to be honest, it is about time. We keep on saying that we understand they've been under a consent decree. And that hasn't actually brought the changes that people were expecting. And literally people are still experiencing death at the hands of police here. And we would be remiss if we didn't understand that the police consent decree was not going to do all the things we needed. So we needed this, man. We needed this large amount of, actions being taken to say, we have a way to do this better.
And I'll ask Alia to run some of the footage we have of this, because I was working on this on Seattle Channel not too long ago. This is one of those stories where there are a lot of different things happening with it. I mentioned that piece about the chokeholds that have been banned. This was a really big deal when we're talking about the death of Manny Ellis down in Tacoma. It was something that brought up a lot of different thoughts for me when we were talking about George Floyd and the murder trial that just wrapped up there. Manny Ellis was very much an example of that, unfortunately, here in the Northwest. So there's a ban on chokeholds for sure. They're also talking about the use of tear gas. Now, I know you guys have talked plenty about tear gas here on Converge Media, but this was one of the big holdups here, Trey, in looking at this. It was one of these situations where they said, all right, we want to ban tear gas completely. It's, it's not allowed in terms of the Geneva Convention and warfare, right? But they're able to use it in police departments. So while they did make a lot of progress, this was one where there was a lot of back and forth and some compromising going on. What they ended up coming up with is tear gas can be used, but only in limited instances. And I'm going to break this down because this was part of the House bills that were going on. This tear gas can only be used if two things here. If it's situations where there's some barricaded subjects, there's hostage situations and riots, and there's some of the photos of Manny Ellis and what he ended up going through. So when this tear gas is going on, this is a situation where they can use it in these very limited situations. And this is really important. Tear gas can be used only in situations if the highest elected official in the jurisdiction signs off on it. It has to be the mayor, et cetera, somebody accountable to voters. So people like Manny Ellis, I mean, these types of things, we're respecting that with regard to the different legislation that's going on here. So I think about victims like that in the past. I think about trying to come through with some police legislation here. And I just wanted to focus on that tear gas piece because, again, I know you all have been through it and talking about it plenty on Converge Media here. In looking at that, when you hear about those different restrictions on tear gas, does that feel like a middle ground to you? Was that a good compromise, bad compromise? What do you think about that?
Well, the thing is, I mean, when we think about, how it played out just in the protest movement here and what we saw with tear gas, it's not actually surprising that there was some need for compromise to say, let's ban it all together. But the idea is that now the highest level official, is going to have to sign off on it. I think that does give some bit of relief here, where it's like, this is a limited use kind of thing. It's not just going to be something that the police themselves get to decide to do. Right. And I think too, when we talk about the consent decree, we've seen how they've had to make changes based on that, right? It comes back and the judge says, look, you can't put that on them based on this decree. So again, I think that this was a way of kind of making that happen, in the environment that we're in right now.
Sure. And I really wonder what impact a state law like this will have on the consent decree process for SPD. They've been going through that since 2012. They're still in the middle of this contract negotiation for the Police Officers Guild there to get a contract in place. So I think there's a lot of places to fall, or a lot of things that need to fall into place locally when it comes to the Seattle Police Department. But I wanted to bring up a couple more things, if I could, on this whole police piece at the state level, because there was another couple pieces here. It was a situation where there's this independent officer review board that they've set up there. And also the situation where officers are required to intervene when they see another officer using excessive force. Certainly something we've been talking about a ton over the last few weeks with the George Floyd trial, but also this is a situation where I think you saw here a response to that in some way. I think there was a way to at least speak to that and say, all right, there's other officers. You can't just say just following orders or whatever else. There has to be that interplay within officers, and they have to check themselves sometimes, I think.
Absolutely. And we just ran a story last week where, a woman finally was getting justice because she spoke up and lost her job. Right. And so when you think about how it really does take the work of so many, she continued to press, by the way. And now we're seeing something like this happen right here in our own state. I think it is so important that officers hold each other accountable. It's something that I think many folks that have worked in different ways of reform and have worked in different segments of this is, when I think about community organizing, it's something I've heard a lot. How come these officers are not holding each other accountable? So that is really huge.
Yeah. It's a big deal for them. And I think it's a big deal within the police community. I think it's going to set a statewide standard where it's not, well, that's just something they do in Seattle, or that's what's happening on the West Side. No, this is something that's going to spread throughout the state. And I think at least provide a level that everybody has to start from. You can't just say, that's not how we do it in this community. It's like, no, that's not how it's done. So I'm really hopeful about that. And I'm thinking that with those new laws in place, there are going to be some changes in different departments. Again, I know a lot of people have been saying that for a long time, but I think now we're seeing some impetus with this, definitely because of the Black Caucus in Olympia pushing these things forward. That's really making some progress. So I'm excited about that piece for sure.
Me too. And thank you for giving us a great summary kind of, because we've been hearing about it, right? And I think for anybody who's not directly connected to it, it just is like, whoa, there's a lot going on. There's a lot happening down there in Olympia. But honestly, this is so necessary. It's just like, this is really the times we're in right now. We need to be able to have something that is going to hold police accountable in these ways. And shout out to everybody who really worked on this to make sure that people down there in Olympia were hearing the voices of people that have been on the ground. It was really so many champions pushing this and ushering it through.
It was. I wondered if I could move on to another piece that I was working on there in O-Town, if I may. All right. Well, because I got to say, there was so many things happening. I'm going to try to cover it as best I can. Make sure you track this down because your legislators have been busy. Watch how they voted on this kind of stuff. So there was another piece to this, which I thought was very interesting, a new tax on capital gains. And I know Trey's probably worried about her portfolio right now. I mean, multimillionaire over here. She's upset about that. No, not really. So this is a new deal where there's a Senate bill in place now that'll put a 7% tax on capital gains on more than $250,000 from the sales of stocks and other investments there. So it's going to raise more than $500 million annually beginning in the year 2023. And basically, this is a lot of money that's going into the education legacy trust account for early learning and also some childcare problems. This one's an important one, though, Trey, to look at because it does affect people at the top of the scale, right? We're talking people who are making a lot of money in stocks and whatever else. And Senator June Robinson has been working on this one, Senate Bill 5096. But in looking at this, you think about the people who are making the big bucks in the stock market or whatever else. Our legislature has been so concerned about this because we do not have an income tax in our state, which is an important point because people in this state don't like that. And whenever it's brought up on a ballot, people reject it, even if it affects just the top people in the range. So there was something very interesting done with this bill specifically. It basically is working to block off the possibility of a referendum on this in the future. I'm still working out the details on what exactly that means, but I think lawmakers have been very, very intent on this, trying to put something in place to try to work on income inequality, which is an awful problem for decades here, only getting worse, right? So they tried to put this thing in place. I think the challenge is going to come from a number of different businesses who have seen over the years, hey, guess what? The IRS, when they see capital gains, they say that is an income tax. And so is this going to be constitutional? And that's a big, big piece because, and I think this was the end game here all the way for the legislature. I think what the legislature, at least the people who supported this, wanted to do was, let's get this through. Let's see what happens. And then let's let the Supreme Court figure out what's going on with this, which we've got a very progressive Supreme Court. They might like their chances there, but there's a lot to this issue. So I think a lot of people might look at it as, oh, it's just a tax on people who are making a ton of money on the stocks. there's actually some more to this when it comes to income tax. And I don't know, when you hear about that, what legislators are trying to do here, income inequality is one piece, but that whole bit of income tax, I don't know if a lot of people really like that in our state. What do you think?
Well, it has been such a big issue. And I think that you're right to be able to make that kind of dichotomy between, this capital gains tax and, income tax. I think one of the things that is really interesting about all of this is that there is a need for something, right? And so I think that sometimes we have legislators who go, well, this we could probably get this through, and then let's kind of see how it plays out. Let's ride it out a little bit. And I think that it's important because for folks that are able to make over $250,000 by selling stocks or all of that, to me, I think it is important because we do need a direct investment into exactly where that money's going. Early learning and education.
Childcare, it's huge.
Childcare. All of that is important. We've talked about the fact that a lot of those cost burdens are on families. And we know that we still have a lot of single mothers out there that are trying to figure out how to do it all. And so the ideas around, this being a direct way to start finding ways to bridge the gaps and to kind of close those gaps. I think it's important, Brian. But again, I mean, you're right. It's something that we're going to kind of have to see as it plays out.
It's interesting. And I think we heard this phrase a few different times in the legislature. Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And you might have heard that one before. So I think it's one of these situations where they're throwing a few things out there. And I know we're going to talk about drug possession law in a little bit. This was definitely a case with that. But I think they're trying to put something out there, get some different feedback on it, and then see what happens with it, which I think is the job of legislature. I think you put that out there and then there's reactions to it and then stuff happens and changes. I mean, I think that's legit. But I'm interested in this one specifically because I really think that feedback on anything that resembles an income tax is not good in this state. So where does that go from here? What kind of feedback are we going to hear from different constituencies? And I think it's going to be pretty loud. There's going to be some big pushback on this. This is definitely going to court. But I really wonder how that's going to go. I just know that, like you say, legislators have been working on this for years to try to work on this income inequality piece. And I just wonder, where it's going to end up, because I think a lot of people have been struggling with this for a while. You mentioned families that are struggling. The state's trying to respond to that. They actually increased their state budget. The overall state budget went up by about $5 billion. They're getting some better revenue right now, which is great. But they're also trying to apply that revenue to people who have needed help for years, people in low income situations, people who need childcare, people who need help with education, whatever else. So I think it's been a responsive legislature, but it's also interesting because a number of the measures that I'm talking about that are going through here today are measures that voters have actually rejected in the past on a statewide level. So it is an interesting balance there, I think.
And really, this is where I think diverse voices really bring in a different perspective here. You know what I'm saying?
And more of them came in, Trey. I think this is crazy to think about, but more of those voices came in because of COVID. Crazy, right? But because it was virtual, you really were hearing from people all over the state during these different hearings or whatever else. But back to your point on that.
No, I think that's important. That's what I'm saying, because that's really what helps you get more of a robust bill in place. I mean, when we're talking about how this may affect a certain income level or, lifestyle or whatever, that is only a part of it. We do need to think about the fact that our state, I mean, when we talk about how, hard it's been to live here, for so many folks.
How we do taxes. Washington is the most regressive state in the U.S. when it comes to taxation. I mean, that's where you're going with that.
That's a part of it. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying, is that we have to look at it because holistically, there is a need to do something different, right? And people have been saying it for a long, long time. So you're right, Brian. We'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, interesting. I would love to move on to another piece if I could here. I'm just keep on keeping on here. This one was very interesting. I thought a restriction on carbon emissions. So again, this is something our state has been working on for many, many years here, trying to figure out something with regard to carbon emissions. You remember a couple of years ago with Initiative 1631, people turned this one down. So that's an important thing to remember there. This is some footage from Seattle Channel you're looking at here, but this is an issue that has really stuck around. Certainly has for Jay Inslee, our governor. He's been talking about this for years and years, even before he was governor. So what they actually did this session was they passed this cap and trade measure, as it's called, on carbon pollution that will include a gas tax and many other measures that voters have rejected over the years. So in looking at this one, I should point out once again that this is another one of those issues, kind of like income tax or whatever else, that voters have pushed back on many times over the years. Business leaders say something like this could hurt our economy, creates a situation where some industries win and some industries lose. Basically, what this bill does is this: it creates a system to cap carbon pollution and greenhouse gas emissions and sets specific limits for individual businesses. And that's how that kind of breaks down. Those businesses would then purchase credits for allowed emissions. That's what cap and trade is all about. Overall, over the years, this is a situation where these carbon credits will gradually get reduced. And the big goal is that by the year of 2050, we get this goal of net zero emissions here. So this is the other point I wanted to make with this, though, because I thought it was a very, very important point baked into the Senate Bill 5126. It adds requirements that air quality actually has to be monitored and measured. Super important. And they're going to do it in communities that have disproportionate environmental and health impacts from pollution. And that's talking about communities of color right there. I think a lot of this climate change debate that's been going on over the years sometimes it hasn't really involved the people who are most affected, which turns into communities of color. And I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but that always strikes me about bills like this.
You're so right. And oftentimes I think that it's important. There's a lot of work being done on the ground at kind of this organizational level to help folks understand how they're being impacted, by all of this. I mean, our climate change issue is huge.
It's real.
It is a global issue. And I think that it's important as a state to be thinking about what we can do to try to reduce carbon emissions, what we can do to try to ensure that there are measures put in place to approve and provide some type of, kudos to you for reducing type of thing. I mean, that's important because at some point it is like this reward system that also I think can really play into this. And oftentimes, I've been hearing so much about this from folks that are like, this is what we do as an organization. We're going to work on climate change. We're going to work to ensure that the communities that are most affected by climate change understand how they can also be a part of the solution. And I think that it has to be holistic.
Yeah, the solution has to be cultural and it has to be financial. And I thought it was very interesting in this session. There was actually someone who came in from BP in support of this legislation. That very, very rarely happens here. So I think we're seeing a bit of a change in some ways with regard to those attitudes. Again, this is something that voters statewide have rejected over the past several years, but I think we're seeing some changes there. And I wanted to point out there's one other piece to this that's a little bit of a gotcha with this bit with the cap and trade here. So this would take effect in 2023, this cap and trade system here, but that's only if by that point, lawmakers can pass a new transportation spending package that will include a gas tax hike of some sort by about 5 cents. So I got to say, again, this is one of those balance kind of situations. We are talking about some gains, I would say, when it comes to the cap and trade piece, but we are talking about a gas tax, which, as we know, is another one of those regressive taxes out there. And while there's definitely some benefits for communities of color from a bill like this, I think about the gas tax that everybody's going to have to pay, and it affects communities of color there too, because everyone's got to get around, right? Granted, we're trying to use transit wherever we can, but I think that gas tax is going to be that really interesting debate over the next couple of years. When you hear about that, what goes through your mind?
Well, it's just interesting because one of the things that I think is really key here is that we have to do something, period, point blank. And so there's some of this that really falls on us, but I think a lot of consumers, a lot of individuals and families go, what about the companies that have just been, charting out waste after, like day after day?
You bet.
And when we think about that, I think that there's something more on them and how they do their business that is really important and should be impacted by anything that we're looking at in terms of a change around how we see, climate change and us being really responsive to how we are kind of killing the planet here. And there's
not even kind of.
People want to debate the science, Brian. They want to,
today.
This and
not
that.
Today,
but
Trey.
at the end of the day, like the truth is just the truth. So at some point, we all are going to have to reconcile with what that truth is. And I think it's important. I also think too, one of the things that has to be really thought about in a post-COVID era, right? Is mass transit, right? Like I even think for myself, is double masking up enough if I'm on the bus and
Yeah.
I don't know where any of these people come from
Sure.
or, right?
Yep.
And so I've been one of those people that drives because I was like, it's just
Yeah.
easier for me to do that.
Yep.
And then when I'm in the city, I need my car to get around to different locations. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to consider there.
There
But
is.
I think all of these things really
Yeah.
are things that we will be kind of dealing with over time.
I think so too. And it's this whole idea. We've heard it with a few different debates around COVID, if you will, when it comes to different pieces like education, when it comes to pieces like the police department. Let's build back better. You know what I'm saying? And I think the same thing is going on when it comes to our environment here too. It's like COVID has given all of us a lot of time to think and be in our own heads. Sometimes that's not all that healthy. You can get stuck there a little bit, but I think what it has done is allowed a lot of people to reflect on how are we going to build back? What's that going to look like? But I did want to press you on that one point. When lawmakers say, okay, if we're going to make this happen, there's going to be a 5-cent gas tax. What do you think the reaction of that is going to be? Because when it comes down to what's hitting you in the pocketbook, I think that's when people start faltering on this. They all believe, everybody believes that we need to protect our earth and our environment in different ways. But when it starts hitting people in the pocketbook, I wonder how that's going to go.
I just really think that it's kind of a sign of our transformative time right now.
Yeah.
I think we're in a kind of era where more people are wanting to do something.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's like, okay, if this is the something we have to do,
Okay.
then maybe this is the something we have to do. And that's my personal opinion
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I'm at a place where, look, we can't just continue on and just, oh no, it's not my issue. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna be paying for that. So-and-so needs to pay for that. At some point, it really does fall on each and every individual in this world. And I think if we can do something right now, if it is a 5-cent, increase or gas tax, then okay, maybe that's what we need to do to say, you know what? Yeah, maybe I'll think a little bit more about, do I need to drive there? Can I walk? Can I do something else? Can I carpool? Maybe we'll start thinking about the other options that will also release and reduce our carbon emission and our carbon footprint. I mean, this is key right now. And we have to start doing things that maybe in the beginning, it'll be uncomfortable for some, right? And it's like, oh man, that's hitting me and I'm already low income or whatever. And I get that. But I also just feel like at some point we do have to do something. And I think that this may be just kind of like that leg up to getting us all to understand that this is our issue and we have to do something about it.
And I think it really kind of pushes the debate. You can talk about it and you can talk about it, but when laws start going on the books, and granted, there's going to be some industry groups I know that are going to push back on this, but when those laws start going on the books, it really forces the debate to happen.
Yeah.
So that's what's going to be going on over the next couple of years. Contact your legislature. Let them know what you think about this, because this is something that they're working on right now. This is policy that's in the making. So they've got this groundwork that they're starting off with these Senate bills that they've passed. But now comes the actual work, the work of passing a transportation package. And what does that look like? Do we need to be building more roads? We need to be doing more transit. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about right now. And it's fascinating to watch it play out. But I think it's going to be a really important debate over the next couple of years.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to jump on another one here. I'm just keep on keeping
Love
on.
It. Love it.
And this was a really important one that we were working on Seattle Channel. I've talked about it on my podcast, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thank you for listening here on Converge and elsewhere if you're doing that. This is something that has to do with drug possession laws and how they're actually prosecuted in our state. So Supreme Court changed a whole bunch of stuff back in February. You can see some of the footage right here. They said the basic drug possession law in our state was unconstitutional. So the state came up with a new version of that law. Drug possession is now a misdemeanor and not a felony. And that's not the only change that's going on here. I just wanted to break this one down because we talked with some outreach workers down at Pioneer Square about this. We talked with people who've been giving care to people here too when it comes to drug treatment and whatever else. This is a really interesting time here. Manka Dhingra, the senator from Redmond, was behind this. And this turned into a very interesting situation. So you'll remember back in February, the Supreme Court handed down this Blake decision. Big deal, saying that drug possession was basically unconstitutional because the law before was kind of messed up. It said, even though you did not know, you might not have known you had a controlled substance on you, you could still get busted for a Class C felony. Supreme Court said no. So when the court threw that out, that really meant the legislature had to get moving quick. I mean, we're talking about major legislation that came together here in a matter of a little less than 8 weeks. So very cool to see that happen here. Although I will say there are some issues with this bill still. So initially, a lot of lawmakers in Olympia, at least the progressive ones, were saying, let's decriminalize drug possession in some ways. Oregon voters did this last fall when they said you can have small amounts of heroin, cocaine, for example, without criminal penalty. It mainly pushes you into treatment first on this deal. Now, the state, in our state at least, the Washington state legislature did not go for that, but they did work out a deal where drug possession is now a misdemeanor. So 90 days in jail, a smaller fine, not a felony with a 5-year sentence, et cetera. So a big change there. Also, there is required intervention the first 2 times police contact you for possession. It's encouraged on the future cases here. The issue right now, though, Trey, with all of this is how to implement this, because it sounds like some progress is being made here. You don't want to put people in jail a whole lot. You don't want to fine them a whole lot. They just get caught up in the system and they get stuck there, right? But this whole concept of going treatment first, I think a lot of places around our state are like, wait a minute, you might have LEAD, law enforcement assisted diversion going on in Seattle and King County, but we don't have that out here. You better ramp up the system real quick, or who knows what's going to go on there. And I just want to bring that up with you because this is a debate that, again, has been going on for years. We need to push treatment first. We need to push for more criminal penalties. And I think this idea that if you have criminal penalties that pushes people into treatment, it's a really interesting debate that came out in the state. And I want to know your thoughts on that one.
This is a tough one right
Yeah,
here because it affects Black communities probably more than most.
Yeah.
And so I know there's so many people that have been voicing their concerns, people that I work closely with that have been really connected to this particular bit of legislation right here, Brian.
It's a big deal.
And the truth of the matter is that I have a lot of thoughts about this. Number one, there is something to be said about how lobbying works to kind of make these things happen and come together, right? So I immediately think about the lobbyists for treatment centers.
Okay.
Because immediately, if it's a treatment first kind of mentality that we're going to take, then you always look at, well, who stands to gain and benefit from this.
Great point.
And it is one of those things where, treatment has not always been accessible to everybody. Let's just be real here. It means that you have to have disposable income in order to do that. A lot of treatment facilities don't actually work on the first round, right? So you're saying, okay, the first couple of times they get caught with this, it's a treatment first thing. But the truth is that I dealt with, addiction in my family. And whether they ever tried to go through treatment or anything, it didn't stick for many of them. So not to say it never works, and that's not what my point is here, but I think it's important to also understand that kind of percentage there of how it's not just about treatment. I think what I resonate with so much is this kind of treating the whole person.
Agreed.
And so it's not just about them going to treatment, because you have to think about and look a leg up and say, wait a minute, what really is actually making them utilize drugs as an outlet and making them want to dumb their minds down so much all the time to not deal with like whatever else life is throwing at them. So I think it's a holistic approach that needs to happen.
I think what I'm hearing from you is it's sure there might be a substance abuse disorder going on, but there's other issues laid on top of that, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're saying, trying to get that treatment on all those different sides.
It's exactly what I'm saying. And this is why when we talk about new ways of reimagining policing right? And reimagining a system where we're really caring for people as their holistic selves. I think that's important here. When you have, I've seen other things work, right? And so I wonder, okay, how open is this treatment? Is it just clinical and you can only go through these certain, firms or, companies that are going to provide the treatment? Or can we be doing, artistic treatment? There's so many things that I've been learning about in the last year and a half that have really opened my mind to understand there's a wide variety of ways to treat a person when they have an illness. And this is what this is. It's an illness.
And you have to tailor that treatment to the person. I think is what
it can't just be a blanketed approach.
No way. The other piece to this that I think was really interesting. So building out those treatment options, that's going to be a big challenge. Doing that on a statewide level. They've set aside some money for that, but state has a lot going on here. And this is an interesting part. I think figuring out how cities are going to handle this load of court cases now, because it's a misdemeanor. It's not a felony that you'd hear at the county or the state level. This is going to be a misdemeanor. So how are cities going to handle that? That's one piece of it. And then there's this other part of it. You've got all these different cases in the past that have basically been blown out. So, I mean, the governor just a couple of weeks ago commuted the sentences, let some people go free who were just there on these drug possession charges because that charge is now invalid, right? So there's going to be this long process, Trey, of resentencing people, of trying to make sure they are reconnected with some of their legal financial obligations, LFOs. You're going to hear that phrase a lot coming up here. So it's not only figuring out the here and now, the treatment we got going forward, but it's working on decades and decades of past convictions here that unfortunately have led to some very damaged lives. And I think that's been the piece I've heard where it diverges a little here. Some people have said, hey, you know what? I needed my brother or my nephew to go to jail to kind of like figure out, whoa, I need some treatment to figure it out. Other people that has not worked for, you know? And so I think in looking at that, our legislature kind of tried to thread the needle on that a little bit. There's definitely still some criminal punishment involved with this, which some people are saying we should never have cops involved with drug possession cases. But other people are saying, you know what? We need that nudge or that stick to go along with the carrot, I guess. We need that stick of law enforcement to try to make something work here. So I'm really interested to see what happens in the here and now and in the future, because you might have heard that the city of Seattle, the police here, they're saying, hey, drug possession, if there's like 3 grams or something, we're not even going to stop people, right? Because there's so many different cases going on, which leads to the idea that maybe we do need some more treatment, right? So I just, I wonder about that, how that's going to play out over the next couple of years.
I think it's it's a real fine balancing act right now. And I think for me, the biggest thing that, that I've been hearing about in community and just in organizations is, really how do we ensure that people are not getting recriminalized? I mean, that's really the goal here is to ensure that we're stopping that, because we know that has not worked. This war on drugs has really been a huge epic failure. And I think now we're in a time, this is what I'm saying, is everything is so transformative right now. We have enough history to be able to say, you know what, we understand that there's some things that were missteps here. How do we resolve them? How do we fix them and move forward?
And I think you'll hear that phrase too, the war on drugs has not worked. You'll hear that from law enforcement too, who's been talking on this. We talked about this on Seattle Channel. I urge you to check it out. The decriminalizing drugs piece we put together recently really had some good back and forth on it. You'll hear that from law enforcement, but I think moving forward, I'm really interested to see what is that next step. Are we as a state ready to decriminalize drugs? Oregon did it, again, as I mentioned last fall with that vote where they're like, all right, if you're caught and you got just a little bit or whatever else. I mean, the idea is they're not looking to punish people. They're looking to direct them into treatment. And I think that's the difficult part. And that's my question to you. Do you think our state is ready to do that? It's a barrier to cross, It's happened in other countries. A lot of advocates will bring up the country of Portugal. They've basically decriminalized all drugs, but their usage rate, overdoses, all that are very low in that country. And so I don't know. I think there's something different about American culture, if you want to call it that. Washington as well. Is our state ready to make that jump and decriminalize drugs? What do you think?
I think we need to a certain degree. I'll be honest with you. I just don't think the criminalization of drug possession has worked in our favor. So it's at that point where it's like, we do have to do something different right now. And maybe that is a huge pivot. It's a shift in the ways that we understood it. And actually, again, learning from countries like Portugal, learning from like an Amsterdam, right? I mean, Holland, we've seen it be like, you know what? That's not what we're going to spend our time on. You know what I mean? If that's what you choose to do as an individual or something, is if you're not, robbing, stealing, and all of this to get it, then maybe that's what gets criminalized, but not just you using drugs, right? So I think that, again, it's a fine balancing act, Brian. We'll see how this one rolls out, because I do think that Washington is ready to do this. I think, we talk about these progressive measures of Washington State, and I really do see so much of what we just did in that police package of bills, really showcases that we do have the opportunity to lead in certain ways. I mean, the Pacific Northwest, people will call, us in Portland, these sister cities all day long, right? And so I think it's important to kind of think about, maybe we are ready to do this, you know what I mean? And kind of showcase to the rest of the nation how it's done.
And I'll just add a last piece here. This is something that the state legislature is going to be keeping an eye on over the next several years. They basically put a measure in this such that a few years from now, they're going to revisit this and try to figure out some new ways to change this. They're studying it like crazy. They've got a group in place right now, an advisory group that's looking to provide some answers to them by December. Again, this is one of those, had they not done anything here, it would have been a wild, wild west, crazy kind of situation with regards to this. So I think what they put together here is at least a way to move forward with this.
There we go. Man, Brian came with that
Breaking
fire today.
Breaking it down.
Came with that heat. Well, you guys heard it right here from Brian himself. Really appreciate you breaking down all those things happening in Olympia. And it's important that we keep you guys informed. We're going to take a quick break right now. Stay tuned. You're watching Morning Update Show.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't missing my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own. Tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Morning Update Show. I'm your co-host, Trey Holiday, and joining me today is my guest co-host, Brian Callanan. Man, you just came with the fire in that first segment, and really, you guys, we wanted to be able to dive a little deeper. You know, Omari and I have been talking a lot about what's been going on in Olympia, and Brian just came with some details, so we hope you guys enjoyed that. I have a couple of stories myself here that I'm excited to share with you, and the first one right here that I want to jump into is Jayapal and Mr. Bernie Sanders. Together, they have come up with the Introduce College for All Act to make college tuition free. I mean, I had to cover this because the truth of the matter is that we have been seeing some measures of this with the Promise Act that we've been talking about right here through education on Converge. And, you know, that was making it free for people to go to community colleges, right? All of the Seattle colleges. And so it's really exciting to see this happening at a federal level. You know, quickly, Brian, what are some of your thoughts about just free college tuition?
I know it feels like a big step, but I mean, I think this is an interesting bill. It's changed over the years. So as it stands right now, this is a situation that would help out families making up to $125,000. So we're talking about people who are maybe not all that well off, but also people who might be making a little bit of money, right? Yeah. So it's interesting to see this. And they're talking about community college free for everybody around the country, public colleges and universities free as well. I think this one's really interesting because I'm a proud graduate of the University of California at Berkeley, which interestingly enough, into the 70s and I believe early 80s was free to anybody who lived in the state of California. Can you even imagine that right now? You're going to Berkeley and you're going for free, right? It doesn't happen, right? So even at my time there, which is a little while ago, you know, tuition did start going up, but it was still relatively inexpensive. But now we're talking about 5 digits plus for all of these places. And I think it creates this really interesting competition, I guess, where there was not a competition for the dollar beforehand. And I don't know if it's entirely healthy for the university. I don't know if it's entirely healthy for the students or whatever else. I don't know if this is the bill that's going to get through. There's a lot of pushback on it from the Republican right here and some moderate Democrats too. So I'm not sure where this is going to go, but I think we're definitely seeing a big push for this at the national level. Absolutely.
And the thing that really wanted me to like talk about this today is because we need introductions of bills like this to understand how the minds of people are really beginning to shift around college. I think you just hit the nail on the head there around how it became, you know, we talk about capitalism a lot, right? But just how it became about this money grab.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because really, you know, when you talk about families that are making up to $125,000 a year, that's 80%.
That's right.
Of the family. So that, I mean, this really, this bill could really help a ton of families. And, hey, we'll see how it plays out, obviously. But I just had to kind of give a shout out because I think it's really courageous for any of our officials, political officials, to be saying, we really need to find a way to get this done. Other countries have done it. And we are, suffering when we talk about college debt. And so I know Biden has his own measures around this and trying to look at how to knock down, debt that people owe right now. It's just been such a nightmare for so many, and it makes a lot of younger folks go, well, is that really the route for me? You know what I mean? So we'll see how this plays out. There's a lot more to consider.
I think so. And just briefly, just coming out of COVID too, I think a lot of people have been kind of scared to go to college a little bit. It's like, should I be doing that? Whatever else. So I think if any of the colleges and universities need a kick in the rear, now's the time. They want people to be involved with this whole process. They don't want people to be staying at home. And so as we emerge from COVID, I think a bill like this is going to be a really important part of the discussion.
Absolutely. My second headline, you guys, is really about a celebration of life. Miss Hester Ford
this story.
Recently passed, but made it all the way to age 115 or 116, as they say, because they were like, maybe she's 116 years old. I just have to point out some of the statistics around her life. Okay, she got married at 14. She was a farm worker, got married at 14. She had 12 children, 68 grandchildren, 125 great-grandchildren, and over 120 great-great-grandchildren.
I can't add that high.
I'm just saying, I just had to give a celebration here. Congratulations for living that long. You inspire all of us. And I know that she is gone now, but it was for me when I read this story, Brian, it just really filled me with joy.
It did for me too. We're talking about a woman in North Carolina who lived through a few pandemics, right? She went through the flu pandemic of 1918. She went through a time in her life where she was sharecropping. She went through a time in her life where she was free. She went through a time in her life where she never thought she'd see a black president elected, but she did. And the Obamas actually wrote her a letter. I think it was about 10 years ago when she was the ripe young age of 105, right? But I think she really saw in that something that grew over her life. And her family was commenting on this quite a bit. Hester Ford affected a lot of different people and really, I think, valued her life, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, in such a way that she, in her own quiet way, just was kind of held up as a great example. And her family has had a lot of great things to say about her. And as much as you do mourn a death like this, what a great life to celebrate, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. For me, it's, almost any time that someone passes where it's not, at the hands of something that's super tragic. I always think about the celebration of life and just, I'm so glad that we could give some space today to say, it is worth all of us to understand, so many people work really hard to get to where they are. And she is really an example of that, so thank you. I'm glad that we had that. I know next up, we actually have a little bit more we're going to learn from you about Seattle Channel, because you've been there, for what now, over 10 years?
Yeah, about 10 years.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about Seattle Channel.
Seattle Channel is a really interesting place. So it's channel 21 on your dial there if you're checking it out on cable, and I hope you do. I think a lot of people have seen it over the years, Trey, as something like, well, that's just a place where they have city council meetings. Turns out it's a lot different than that. It's a situation where you can see shows with me on there. You want to check that out. But it's got a whole bunch of different things on there with some independent programming that really no other station in the country does at the municipal TV level. So the station is honored every year for being one of the top city TV stations in the country, which is really cool. And I think the reason is because they're doing something above and beyond. So just about every city has its own TV station, right? You can see one in Bellevue, Federal Way, all over the place. And they show those city council meetings, which is super important. It's sort of the meeting of record, right? You want to make sure you're able to see that. But I think that next level of going a little bit beyond that, of trying to interpret some of the different things that are going on in our city politically. We've got a great cultural and arts department. Nancy Guppy has been doing it for years and cranking out great stuff there. We've got some wonderful storytellers with the story of City Stream out there that I've been able to take a part in. So I think what it does, what Seattle Channel has been able to do, is really show a spotlight on a community in a way that I don't know if any other TV station really does. You know what I mean? So it's been really valuable to me in terms of my own personal growth to be there, if I may. It's been great to be a part of it. Great to be with people who really strive to make something excellent, to make something that's awesome. Just nominated for a ton of Emmys and stuff like that. I mean, it's a really, really solid place. And I've appreciated the opportunity. I really appreciate everybody watching it. And I think it's a lot more than people might think. It's really something different.
Well, I was pretty impressed by this commercial. I think we have it. If you want to play that commercial, just so folks can understand, you're going to get more than politics at the Seattle channel. There we go. I mean, great stuff, Brian. And I'm glad that you were here to tell us a little bit more about it. And I think that commercial really showcases it, because I was impressed. I was like, what? They do arts too, and they do this stuff. So that's really great. And I think actually too, Seattle is one of those places that is really just trying to lead. And I think other city channels really can learn from the fact that you've expanded, and it's not just about the politics. So.
And looking through a race and social justice initiative lens through all of it, super important. I did a story recently about the Peace Peloton. Check these guys out. They got another event coming up in May. They support Black businesses all around the area, rolling around on their bikes. They got something coming up on May 8th. I wanted to give a shout out to those guys because they're really cool. But it's one of those kind of things, never would have known about them if I hadn't had the opportunity to do a story with them with Seattle Channel.
Yeah, they are so cool. And we've been connected with them at the organizational level. So shout out to you guys at Peace Peloton. You guys just heard a little bit more about Seattle Channel, and we just have a couple more things for you right after this break. Stay tuned. You're watching the Morning Update Show.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own. Tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.
Welcome back, you guys, to the Morning Update Show. I'm your co-host, Trey Holiday. And before we get out of here, we just thought we'd give you guys a little bit of a view into some of the history that we have with Mr. Brian.
Hey there, Brian Callanan from the Seattle Channel, also the podcast, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. I just wanted to say happy anniversary to the Morning Update Show. Trey, Omari, you guys are doing terrific work. I really appreciate it. But I did hear it said somewhere, you didn't come this far just to come this far. So I am looking forward to many, many more anniversaries to come. You guys are doing incredible stuff. It's great to be a partner with you on Converge Media. Let's keep rocking this party.
Absolutely. And we're keep rocking this party.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Seattle News, Views, and Brews, you're doing that with our guy Kevin Schofield at SEC Insight. You guys are actually really complement each other well on that podcast. And I know that it's like additional work for you outside of Seattle Channel, but it's a beautiful thing that we've been able to connect, and Converge has been always looking to make certain connections. And so you show that.
Oh, all the time. And I got to say, I'm going to give you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. because
there
that had
we
to happen there,
go.
Trey. There you go. You got it.
There we
I got
go,
one for Ollie
guys.
over here too. So you get a
Thank
mug. You get a
you.
mug. You get a mug. Right. No, it's been great to connect with Converge, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, to be part of it. And I think it all is part of the effort of informing our community. That's something I really believe in passionately. I know that a lot of people that are watching this show like to be informed, and I'm glad that you're tuning in. This is all part of it. It's a group effort, don't you think?
Absolutely.
We're going to do it with the podcast. We're going to do it on Converge, and we're going to help people get informed about the things they need to know.
There we go. And before we get out of here, we're just going to show you guys a quick teaser of Seattle news, views, and brews.
I wanted to make sure I passed along as well. A big thanks to Converge Media. It runs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. And Kevin, I heard Omari Salisbury from Converge told me his mom, the Reverend Harriet Walden, is a fan of our show, as well as Ruby Holland. Ruby, Reverend Walden, thank you so much for listening. All right, let's get things going with right here, right now.
There we have it, you guys. What a great show today. Omari will be back tomorrow. My buddy, my partner. Brian, you have been phenomenal. Thanks so much for joining us in studio today.
It's been great to be with you, Trey. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You guys, until tomorrow for the Morning Update Show at 11 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Peace.
See ya.
Lift every voice and sing till earth in heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. Facing the rising sun.